Mellitrix is back with a new take on the TKL layout. We're going to take a look at the Zoom TKL Dyna. Before we dive in, I want to mention that Mellitrix sent me a pre-production Zoom TKL Dyna for the purpose of reviewing it. I was not paid to make this video, and Mellitrix has no input on my review. I will put some purchase links in the description if you're interested in joining the group buy for the TKL Dyna, and they might be affiliate links depending on where they are. I'll mark it in the description. This won't be my first Zoom keyboard or even my first Zoom TKL, but it will be the first one that I've had with these unique mounting styles and also cork padding. Before we get into more details, I just want to point out that Mellitrix has shared some info about a few things that are going to be different with the production units compared to my pre-production unit. First, there will be some additional force breaks between the top and bottom of the case. Now, I didn't personally have too much of an issue with case ping, even with the brass plate installed. They also will be going with different stabilizers to include in the production unit packages, and I was glad to hear that because the stabilizers that they sent with my unit are honestly not great. They felt and sounded scratchy even after I lubed them. So with the production units, they're going to be including WS stupid stabilizers, and I have used a set of those in the past, and they were better than these. So if you do hear any kind of a scratchy sound from the stabilized keys in the sound tests, that is another thing that will be different with the full production run. Okay, so for my review, Mellitrix sent me the TKL Dyna case in the gunmetal gray color, and both the flex cut and non-flex cut PCBs. They sent me a polycarbonate plate and a brass plate along with pour-on foam and the cork pad kit. So I was able to actually do two separate PCB assemblies without having to share parts. Here's the flex cut one, and the non-flex cut one is in there right now. I assembled the flex cut PCB with the polycarbonate plate and the cork pad kit with a silica gel button mount. I was going for maximum flex. And then for the non-flex cut PCB, I used the brass plate that they sent and a pour-on foam kit. Speaking of those options, let's now get into the features and specs. We'll do the sound tests, and then we'll get into pros and cons. The Zoom TKL Dyna is an 80% TKL keyboard kit which can be assembled with an optional LCD screen and encoder knob. The PCB supports ANSI and ISO layouts as well as a split spacebar. Construction is 6063 aluminum with 14 color options plus a polycarbonate option. The case finish varies by the color, and it could be anodized, accustatic, spray coating, or electrophoresis for the E-white option. The bottom of the case features a uniquely shaped accent weight, which is either aluminum or stainless steel depending on the case color option. The dimensions are 356mm by 139mm with a front height of 18mm and a rear height of 37mm without the keycaps. The fully assembled weight is around 2 kilograms or 4.4 pounds, but it does depend on your configuration. The typing angle is 6.7 degrees and there are no adjustable feet. There are flex cut and non-flex cut PCB options. Both of them are tri-mode and hot swappable. Connectivity includes 3 Bluetooth connections with 133 Hz polling, 2.4 GHz with up to 4 kHz polling, and USB-C wired with up to 8 kHz polling. The stabilizers are screw-in PCB mounted, and Mellitrix has stated that WS stupid stabilizers will be included with the final production units. There are 6 plate options including polycarbonate, POM, FR4, aluminum, carbon fiber, and brass. There are also 3 foam kit options including classic foam, all pour-on foam, or cork pads. The cork pad kit does not include anything for the bottom of the case under the PCB other than the included PET sheet. There are 4 mounting options included: silica gel bean gaskets, split O-ring, elastic bar silicone gasket, and top mount. Backlighting includes full per-key RGB with multiple modes as well as accent LEDs on the case top and LED ambient lights in the 4 corners of the bottom. The LCD uses pogo pin connectors and a small daughter board, while the encoder uses a hot swappable unit that can easily be replaced with a regular switch. The TKL Dyna includes 2 4000 mAh battery cells for a total of 8000 mAh capacity. The Dyna is VIA compatible for remapping and macro creation, and there is also a Mellitrix web tool for customization that includes the ability to configure the encoder knob and the LCD, as well as select the proper layout adjustments for your installed modules and layout. The price of the Zoom TKL Dyna kit depends on your selected options. The total price ranges from $185 to $230, and additional plates, foam kits, and knobs can be purchased separately. Check the links in the description for group buy information or in-stock availability. All right, now let's get into some pros and cons for the TKL Dyna. First up in the pros, let's talk about the build quality. Now with a pre-production unit, I do expect that there could be a few imperfections, and with mine, there was just one little thing. One of the feet on the bottom of the case is seated slightly differently, and that makes it wobble just a tiny little bit on a hard surface. Now I actually didn't notice it on my felt desk mat, and I wouldn't expect that on the production units. And that was the only little thing I found. I didn't find any other imperfections. The quality of the machining and the finish in general here is excellent, and the case bottom is quite interesting with the smooth sloping lines. This gunmetal gray color is an anodized finish, and I found it to be very nice and smooth. Next up, I am happy to see the ball catch assembly here, because with so many assembly options, which we'll talk about next, removing and replacing screws here would have been rather annoying. Okay, let's talk about all of these assembly options that you have here. Overall, this is just one big pro, because you really can create a version that's exactly what you want. Some options like the PCB option for flex cut and non-flex cut and the different plate choices, those are common choices to have for a custom keyboard, but the mounting options here are unique, and the modular LCD and encoder are also unique. Now, the mounts include a top mount and 3 gasket types: silica gel buttons, split O-ring, and elastic bar silicone gasket, which is kind of like a silicone sleeve but with feet. And the LCD and encoder section here has multiple configuration options. You could skip both the LCD and the encoder and go with a row of 3 keys, or you could keep the encoder and skip the LCD and instead go with 2 keys there, and you get the point. You can go with any combination that you want here. The LCD uses a pogo pin connector that rests on a small daughter board. We'll get back to that later. The encoder is a hot swappable unit, just like a switch, and the low profile knob has a set screw to hold it in place. Now I am going to comment on the functionality of the screen separately here, but the pro here is just how many options you have between both the internals and the modules for the top right of the TKL Dyna. Now another pro is that although this could potentially be just a little bit confusing, the TKL Dyna supports both VIA and a Mellatrix web tool for customizing the firmware. The reason this is a pro is because VIA does not allow for customizing the encoder knob functions, and it also doesn't do anything with the LCD. If you do have a screen or a knob or both, you can use the Mellatrix web tool to customize the TKL Dyna, and it does include the ability to change the function of the encoder knob, including mouse scroll functions, and you can also change some of the settings for the LCD as well. There's also a setting for controlling the polling rate in the web app, so if you don't need 8K polling and you want to maximize your battery life, you can change it to something a little less power demanding, like 1000 Hertz. I also want to mention that 15 color options is pretty crazy in a good way. Actually, I guess if you're prone to analysis paralysis when there are a lot of choices, it could be a con, but I love to see unique colors and multiple color options, because the whole point of a custom keyboard is to get something that feels like it's just for you, like it matches the look you are going for. And that's hard to do when there are like 3 color choices. But the next pro is that I did have a good experience with the wireless connections. The 2.4 gigahertz connection was very stable for me. It paired immediately the first time I plugged it in to my work and my Mac computers, and that was true of both PCBs. They both have wireless capability. They came with separate receivers, and they both paired easily the first time, and they never had any disconnecting or ghost entry issues or anything like that. Switching between the wireless connections is easy with key commands, and the Bluetooth connections worked well for me as well. And lastly, in the pros, we have a split story on the battery life. The good news is that with all of the lighting turned off, and even with the LCD screen still on, the battery life seems to be very good, even with the higher polling rate. I was using the 2.4 gigahertz connection, but I did turn off the backlighting for the keys and the accent lights. And over 3 work days, the battery life went from 89% on the little meter here down to 79% on the morning of day 4. So that's 3 full work days, and going to sleep overnight, and it only lost 10%. We will be getting back to the battery life in the cons, because it is a different story when you turn some or all of the lights on. All right, now we're going to move into the neutral category to discuss the aspects here that are very subjective, and they could be pros or cons depending on your point of view. As always, in the neutral category, we have the physical design. Now, the top of the TKL Dyna might look like a fairly pedestrian TKL keyboard, except for the diamond accent LEDs on the right side. And of course, if you do get the LCD screen, you've got that too. But the bottom is more interesting, with a smooth sloped contour and a unique style accent weight, as well as the corner ambient LED lights. There's definitely more going on the bottom here than there is on the top. Ultimately, design is really up to your personal preferences, but one thing that does help here is the ability to go with standard keys instead of the LCD screen. If that's something you don't like, you can go with an even more normal TKL layout and skip the knob and the screen if you want. All right, next let's talk about another almost permanent resident of the neutral category, and that is sound and feel. These are going to be neutral here for a couple reasons. First, there are several options for you to tinker with here. And so the sound and feel that you get are really going to depend on your selected PCB, the plate, the mounting, the foam or lack of foam that you use, and then of course switches and keycaps that you put in it. So with that many variables, I really can't nail down the TKL Dyna to a specific feel and sound. But I can share some generalities and my experience with both of the PCBs. Now, as I said earlier, I set up the Flex Cut PCB for maximum flex by pairing it with the polycarbonate plate and the silica gel bean mount, and I used the Cork pad kit with no foam under the PCB. While this was fairly flexible, it wasn't particularly bouncy because the silica gel mount actually doesn't give you a whole lot of play there. I found the Cork padding to have kind of an interesting sound, but I personally think I still prefer the sound of regular foam between the PCB and the plate because I thought the Cork allowed a little bit of hollowness to be present. But it was so slight that I don't know if you'll be able to pick it up on the sound test. Now, with the non-flex cut PCB that I have in here now, I use the brass plate, which is an add-on, and the elastic bar silicone gasket so that it would still have a slightly cushioned feel even with the stiffer plate and PCB. I did also use the pour-on foam kit, so I've got a switch pad in there, the pour-on foam between the PCB and the plate, and then the foam underneath the PCB. So there's really not a lot of room for those gaskets to move, but it's not going to be quite as firm as the top mount. So overall, you can get quite a big range here of sound and feel with all of the different options. The only negative thing I experienced with feel and sound came from the stabilizers, which Melitrix is changing for the production model, so I wouldn't worry about that. And of course, with custom keyboards, a lot of you may be using your own stabilizers anyway. All right, that's it for the neutral stuff. Let's now talk about a few cons for the Zoom TKL Dyna. We're going to start with a few cons related to the LCD, and individually, these are all little things, but for me, they all just kind of added up. First, there's no dimming for the LCD screen. It's either on or it's off. So if you're in a dark room and you find the LCD too bright, well, too bad. Maybe it's buried in the actual menu in the LCD screen, but navigating the LCD menu is also not very intuitive. There are separate key commands to change the screen modes and then to access some things within some of the screens. But once you do that, I had a hard time figuring out how to navigate any further than that. It really made me feel like an old person. So overall, the con here for the LCD screen is like the collection of all these little quirks that just made it a little bit frustrating to try to use. All right, the next con is getting back to the backlighting. When I was using the 2.4 gigahertz connection, the backlight really seemed to take a toll on the battery life. So this is the other half of the battery life story. And this is not abnormal. Most wireless keyboards that have backlighting take a serious hit to the battery life when you turn the backlighting on. But the reason I'm mentioning this in the cons is because even just the accent lights, meaning the under lighting and the little LED accent light, just having those on seemed to make a significant difference. The battery meter was decreasing at a significant rate. It means I ended up not using any of the lighting. And if you're looking forward to using the accent lighting, that can be kind of frustrating. Now, another small con related to the accent lighting is that you can't control the bottom light, the under lighting, and the top accent light separately. There's one key command and they turn on and off together. So if you want to use just the top light and not have the bottom light, that's not an option. All right, the last two cons I have are not quite as nitpicky. Those first things I know might have sounded a little nitpicky, but this one's a little bit of a bigger deal, I think. There's no actual off on this keyboard. If the PCB is connected to the battery, the best you can do is put it into deep sleep mode with a key command. In this mode, the key entries won't register, but it is not totally off. And there's no power switch hidden anywhere on the PCB to actually shut the power off from the battery. So the only way to truly disconnect battery power is to literally disconnect the PCB. And the last con is ribbon cables. Now, before I get into my kind of soapbox complaint about ribbon cables, I do want to say in fairness, I understand why they used a wired connection in general here instead of like a pogo pin connector for the PCB. They wanted to go with a higher polling rate, apparently. They wanted to go with an 8K polling rate maximum here. Right now, I mean, wired is just the safest bet for a stable connection with higher polling rates. So I get why the PCB connector is a wired connection, but it also didn't need to be a ribbon cable. I mean, have a look at a keyboard like the Wooting 80HE, a Hall effect keyboard with 8K polling, and you'll find a wiring harness style cable that is very simple to connect and disconnect. A ribbon cable is just not that simple, especially when they're very small, like these. It is too easy to break the connector locking hinge, and it's just a finicky thing even if you're using tools. Now the LCD ribbon cable has very small connectors, but thankfully the daughter board for it doesn't permanently attach to the case bottom. So you can, once you disconnect the main ribbon cable, you can pull the whole thing out with the daughter board still attached to the ribbon cable, and you can kind of position it, you can hold it in a comfortable position so that you can disconnect it more easily, but still, I find them too easy to break. All right, so overall, what do I think of the Zoom TKL Dyna? Ultimately, I think this is more interesting than the previous Zoom TKL that I had a couple of years ago, and it definitely offers a huge range of configuration options for a reasonable price. The customization seems to be pretty good here, even if you get the LCD and the knob, because you have the web app to change some settings for both of those. The battery life is pretty darn good if you're not using the lighting, and you should be able to get the typing feel and sound that you prefer with all of the different options that they have. The cons I experienced don't add up to be deal breakers for me personally, but there are a couple of things that I found frustrating. You also, of course, have to like the design. So let me know what you think of the Zoom TKL Dyna, and if you do pick one up for yourself, let me know how you configured it and how you're liking it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Semi-Pro Tech+Gear channel, and while you're here, check out one of these videos. I know you'll enjoy it. Thanks everybody. See you next time.